Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Greetings, friends, neighbors, new friends, former friends, all friends. We're glad to have you joining us today. And as we ran the pre-roll and looked at those pictures that were on there, of course, those are pictures from our book from the 1950s. It reminds me of some of the features that probably our guest today might talk about. And we're very excited to have him on. So Jackie, how can we move forward here today?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Glad you are here with us, friends or acquaintances. So please, I always like to draw attention to the bottom, that purple banner with the white letters that say www.wildthewindmillwatch.com. That is a place to go for all sorts of information concerning the authors, the book which you see above my screen, the vendors, the places where we might be speaking or signing books, and all of the previous 1950s fun chats. This is number 180. Can you imagine that? So anyway, this little book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, was published in 2021. And that little white spot down below indicates an award that was won in 2022, the Independent Press Award for the distinguished favorite of a regional area. So we will get on with our show, as one man in the 50s always used to say. Have any of you met a person who has a passion for hogs? Well, today that time has come. Jeff Wolff was born at the end of the 1950s and was on a diversified livestock and grain farm with purebred cattle and hogs near Eureka, South Dakota. A descendant of German-Russian heritage, Jeff spoke German before speaking English. The eldest of three children, he learned to work hard, and he learned the value of hard work at an early age. He studied animal science at Iowa State University, where he was involved in the meats and livestock judging teams. Jeff has been involved in production agriculture and agriculture business his entire life. His passion for the livestock industry is evident in his involvement and commitment to youth livestock programs and events. Jeff has two grown children who, as youths, were very active in showing livestock locally as well as nationally, and they continue to be involved in livestock. So currently, Jeff and his wife, Tanya, reside at Bath, South Dakota, where they own and operate Wolff Family Genetics, a 40-sow show pig and breeding stock operation that markets pigs throughout the United States. In his spare time, he enjoys attending and judging livestock shows throughout this area, as well as spending time with Tanya in the garden. So, Jeff, we welcome you to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Hey.
Hi, Jeff. Well, it's great to be here. I've watched a number of your chats. I've read your book, and really excited to spend a little time visiting with you.
Oh, thank you. You know, we do share the German-Russian heritage. So would you say that the value of learning to work on a family farm maybe had something to do with the German-Russian heritage?
Certainly it did. Being the oldest child, my parents, were both of Russian German descent. My great grandparents came from Russia. They were Germans, displaced, and then came from Russia. And then my grandparents both were farmers, and my parents, they grew up through the 30s. And, that's the only thing they knew was hard work. And I guess growing up, I was actually, I was born in 1959 in January. And my parents, my mom had me in the barn in a stroller in March when they were farrowing sows. So I've been I guess I could say since I was just a couple of months old, I've been involved in being with the livestock and hard work. My parents worked extremely hard. Money was always tight, but we never, it was not like we were missing out on things, but there were not a lot of extra frills. I remember when the first skid loaders came out, and my mom suggested to Dad that, maybe we should look at investing in one of those. And his answer was, scoop shovels and pitchforks are much cheaper, and I have 3 kids.
That sounds familiar.
Yes, it does. So you were born, as you said, in 1959. So you were a 7-year-old when something catastrophic happened. And as a 7-year-old son of the farm, you were affected by the blizzard of '66 that slammed the upper plain states. So how did that catastrophic event change your family's life and income?
Well, I remember it very well. Went to school in the morning. I was in first grade, rode the bus to school. We lived 2.5 miles from town. So I was the last on and the first off on the bus route, which was nice. And it was a beautiful morning. And by 11 o'clock, we had a raging blizzard and they sent everybody home. And for the next 3 days, of course, the amount of snow and the wind and it was just unbelievable. I had my sister was just a year old. And so my job during the blizzard was to watch her while Mom and Dad went out and did chores. And my mom milked cows by hand. I don't remember for sure how many she had in '66. I know that when I was born, I was told she milked 16 cows, and it got less and less as time went on. But we had a situation where my dad could not, his sows were due to farrow mid-March, and this blizzard hit, I believe it was March 3rd or 4th for 3 days. Luckily, his beef cattle, something told him that morning to keep them, not let them out onto the pasture to feed.
Wow.
North of the yard. And he got them into the corral, and we had a large barn, and so they all had shelter, so we did not lose any cattle. We had a lot of neighbors that did. And but his sows got snowed in a barn with no water. And when the blizzard was over, it still took him a couple of days to get dug through the snowdrifts with the loader. The snowdrifts were as high as the peak of that barn. You could just see the peak of the barn. And due to the stress, I think there were, if I remember right, from being told, I think there were 16 sows that were supposed to farrow, and all but 4 of them had lost their litters. So financially, that was a huge hit. And a number of those were purebred Hampshire hogs that he was raising. And consequently, because of the loss of those litters and the loss of income, he did not go back and repopulate with purebred Hampshire gelts. Those sows were fine, but my dad, growing up, the way he did it, we generally farrowed all gelts in the spring, and then the ones that did the best job, about half of them were rebred and farrowed in August, and then they would be shipped after the litters were weaned, and we would start over with gilts. And it's a little different than what we do now. We have sows that are upwards of 8 and 9 years old, but that's the way he operated. And he just went back to commercial hogs until I was a little older and got into 4-H, and I wanted a purebred, and got a registered Duroc bred gilt. And so my dad decided that we would, if we're going to mess with purebreds and do the registration papers and all that, I guess I'll go back and I'll buy a Hamp. And then we added some Yorks. and grew the operation to where we were selling breeding stock. We were selling boars to commercial hogmen, which that at that time in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there were hogs on just about every farm.
Sure. Jeff, have you ever said to yourself, I don't want to do this anymore?
No, I have not. I have people ask me quite often, "Why aren't you going to retire?" And I said, "Why would I retire from something I love doing?" Yeah, there's days when it's work and there's days when it's frustrating, but that's with any job. I've worked in ag business, and there were days like that there. But 95+% of the time, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Very wonderful. Now let's back up a little bit for those who may not be familiar with a term, and that is the term of gilt. Please.
Gilt would be a young female hog that has not had a litter. So we generally breed them at about 9 months to 10 months of age, so that they're a little over 12 months of age when they have their first litter of pigs.
Litter is about what kind of an average? A dozen, 15, or?
You know, the industry right now, there's a big disparity or a big difference between what we do raising show pigs and breeding stock and what the commercial industry, which is the lion's share of the hog production in the United States. The commercial industry is running about a 12 pig average. We're running about an 8.5 pig average. Just part of it is genetics, and they tend to, and I guess I kind of compare myself to a lot of the older, very experienced breeders in the country. I have very good friends in Ohio and in Iowa, and then you have the young guys, as they call them, that are 20 some and out of college. There's a difference in the trend has changed the type and style of the female. We've leveled these hogs out. I mean, years ago, and as I was growing up, and the hog had more of an arched back. Now a show pig is dead level. You could lay a 2x6 on their back, and it is level. Well, when we've leveled those hogs, we've changed the position of the hips, and therefore I feel we have more farrowing issues. We end up pulling pigs, which growing up, very rarely did you ever pull a pig. And we attended, because when I grew up, we had an old, I shouldn't say it was old. My dad and mom built a building by themselves with the help of a few neighbors in 1958. But that barn had no insulation. We farrowed in there in late February and into March. It had a little supplemental heat with an old pot-bellied stove that we burned old wooden used fence posts and some coal. And it was just so the water didn't freeze in there. And so heat lamps. So we attended all farrowings. Because if you didn't, and we farrowed in pens, if they got over into the corner, they'd get cold and stiff and they wouldn't survive. So you attended farrowings. And I remember as a 10 and 12 and 13-year-old sitting with sows, and only on rare occasions when you'd see one trying to give birth, you'd see they'd be coming backwards, and you'd see the legs, and then they'd disappear, and you'd see them again. And then about the second or third time, you grabbed on and got that pig out of there. And so I guess having grown up attending farrowings, we attend all farrowings here. I mean, we just got done with a batch last week. From Monday, the previous Monday, a week ago, this past Monday, when the first sow farrowed, until the last one farrowed in that group on Friday, one of us, either Tanya or myself, were in the barn all the time. It's just, you have to, if you want to have success in getting as many live pigs as you can because of the value of the pigs. So, you know,
I think that's called stewarding rather than just
For sure.
owning.
yeah, it's yeah, definitely. It's what I guess the way I look at it, that's what a true stockman does. You take care of your livestock and do it absolutely the best you can. And what we find is when pigs are born backwards, if she doesn't have them fast enough, their lungs get so full of fluid that they have a hard time making it. And so that's where we kind of, rule of thumb is if she hasn't had one in 15 minutes, you better check and see what's going on.
Yes.
Okay. So you have something to say, Janine? Or
Well, I'm curious to know, this is kind of goes back to that shovels and forks. And did you ever get a skid steer loader?
No, we didn't, but we have two of them now here. And I tell you, I don't know how you'd farm without one.
Oh, that's right. They are convenient.
Yes.
and necessary.
Yes. Ours gets used pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
Yes. Yes. Love mechanics.
So you grew up in South Dakota. So I'm wondering what circumstances drove you across the border to go to school and college at Iowa State. There must be a story there.
Oh yeah, there is. I had the love for the hogs, and we showed purebred hogs at the South Dakota State Fair and at some national shows. And when I was a junior in high school, the fall of my junior year in high school, at the South Dakota State Fair, at that time there were, I would guess, somewhere around 400 plus hogs shown in the open class breeding stock show. It was a 2-day show. 4 breeds would show one day and 4 breeds would show the next. And that particular year, a gentleman by the name of Al Christian, who was the swine herdsman at Iowa State, and his brother, Dr. Lauren Christian, who was a professor in the animal science department, judged the hogs. And at the end of the first day, we had a pretty good day and we won some classes and so forth. And after the show was over that afternoon, they were standing around and visiting, and Al came over and started a conversation with myself, and my dad was standing there. And as I remember it, Al said, so how old are you? And I said, well, I'm going to be a junior in high school. And he asked me, are you given any thought where you're going to go to college? And I said, well, yeah, kind of, but nothing definite. And he said, well, where are you thinking? And I said, well, at South Dakota State. I've also done some reading on Purdue and Iowa State. And when I said Iowa State, he called his brother, Dr. Lauren, over, who was talking with someone else. And he said, Lauren, come here. And he said, this young man is thinking about going to Iowa State. He's a junior in high school. And Al had judged the hogs we showed that day. Lauren was in the other ring. And Lauren looked at my dad, who was a very conservative German, didn't say much, wasn't a real outgoing promoter as far as the hog end of it and the breeding stock end of it. And Lauren put his hand over on my dad's shoulder and he said, send this young man to Ames. Al and I will make sure he doesn't get in trouble.
That was good enough right there.
That was it.
They knew exactly what to say.
If I wanted to go to Ames, there was no questions asked. That's where you can go.
Uh-huh.
And the other side of that, the flip side of that is having grown up, I graduated from high school in Eureka. There were 57 in my graduating class. And as I was in high school, I would see all the kids that graduated the previous years would be home every Friday afternoon by 3:30, 4 o'clock. And I played in band. And so I was at all the football games and all the basketball games in pep band. And all those kids that grew up and graduated in previous years were home for the games. Well, I knew that if I came home on Friday afternoon, I wouldn't be going to a football game or a basketball game. Dad would meet me at the driveway with a scoop shovel and a pitchfork.
And and welcome you home.
Yes.
So to avoid that,
Well, to avoid that, but I knew that Iowa, having grown up, I mean, when I was in high school, I mean, I lived for livestock shows, to go show pigs or to go out in the field and farm. And so we raised Durocs, Yorks, and Hamps, and each breed had a breed magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like Christmas when that came. That day when I came home from school and the Duroc News or the Hampshire Herdsman or the Yorkshire Journal was laying on the table, that thing got read cover to cover. Every breeder's ad got looked at and studied bloodlines. And I mean, I knew that there were so many breeders in Iowa that were at the top of their game. And there's some of those are still. I've got a good friend in Iowa, Doug Stewart. He's the second generation. They've been in the purebred Duroc business for, I don't know, I think 75 or 80 years on that farm. And those are the kind of people that I wanted to surround myself with.
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you did not grow up in North Dakota, but there's something that happened in North Dakota that is outstanding in your mind. So tell us about the incident in North Dakota Storm, 3 hay bales, and an old tarp.
Well, in the 70s, in the late 70s, we were selling a lot of boars to commercial hogmen. And I distinctly remember, I believe it was probably Christmas vacation from school. A couple of gentlemen called and they said, talked to my dad, and they were going to come down the next day to get a boar. Well, it's a raging blizzard. And they came from Wilton, North Dakota, which north of Bismarck. It was a long haul, but I mean, it was not uncommon to have people come that far. They showed up at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and below zero, blowing snow, snowing, just terrible weather. And this pickup shows up, and it has an open steel stock rack on it.
Ay, ay, ay.
And they've got one straw bale laying in the back of the pickup they hadn't opened, and they wanted to buy a boar. And they picked out a Hampshire boar. And my dad said, well, we always guarantee our breeding stock, but with the situation as cold as it is and hauling them in an open pickup like that, I just can't warranty this animal. Mm-hmm. But we need to get him some protection because he's going to freeze. And so we went and got 2 or 3 square straw bales, and Dad went and rummaged around in the machine shed and found an old pickup tarp that the mice had probably eaten 2 or 3 holes in, that was not being used, but we can't throw it away. We might need it someday.
That's right.
and gave it to those gentlemen and tied it. They tied it on around the front with some baler twine and covered the front of that stock rack and the sides and put all the straw in the front and put that boar in there and sent them on their way. And my dad was just, I shouldn't have even let him take him. I should have told him, you got to come back on a day when the weather's better. But ironically, they called the next year and came back and bought another boar because they said that one was so great.
Yeah.
Cool. And was the weather better the next year?
Yes, it was.
All right. Yes. Well, Jeff, I know you present day as a wonderful chef and cook. Tell us, was there an influence from your mom in the kitchen as you were a little guy?
Yes, there was. I don't know how my mom did it. I mean, she worked outside, milking cows, feeding hogs, cleaning pens, worked in the field. When they put up hay, she raked hay. She got up on top of the haystack that was stacked with a loader, loose stack, and made it around, got it all evened out. And yet she managed to have a large garden and was a great cook. And as being the oldest, growing up when I was 5, 6, 7, when she would, a lot of times Sundays afternoon, she would bake pies. And I would get to help slice apples or peel the apples, or I'd have my nose right in there. And I learned to cook, and love cooking. And Tanya is a great cook and loves to cook. And so between the two of us, we spend some time in the kitchen and can create, now not every day, but can create some pretty nice meals and invite some guests over and so forth. I love grilling and smoking. I've got, people think we're crazy if they walk in our garage. I've got 2 different smokers and 2 gas grills sitting in the garage to wheel out. But it's just, I guess it's something I enjoy doing and love doing. So,
do you have a large garden now?
yes, a very large garden.
Oh.
We use drip irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
I lay down once the plants are, like the peppers and tomatoes are transplanted and everything else comes up in the row that was planted from seed. I will lay drip irrigation lines, and then we will set that either on a timer or manually turn it on when we need it. And yeah, this past year we have a huge rhubarb patch. And there's a story behind that. It was, we didn't think any of it would grow. We dug these rhubarb roots out of a pasture out in McPherson County, where I knew that there was, and we just happened to go by it in the spring, and there was just, you could see there was rhubarb coming, but it was not very big. And I asked the gentleman that owned the land if we could dig those roots, and he said, "Knock yourself out. I didn't even know. I thought those were weeds." And we dug them and we split them and we put them in, and every one grew. And we have about a 40-foot row of rhubarb that is the envy of everybody driving by. But
so do you pick all that and then process it, or do you give it away or
well, we put a lot of it up. I mean, we'll use a lot of it during the winter for rhubarb crisps or rhubarb pies, or but you can only use so much. And so this past year, Tanya sold a lot of rhubarb for, I believe it was $2 a pound. And I mean, she would have people come and get 30 pounds.
Oh.
And then our tomatoes and peppers were phenomenal this past year. And so she ended up, between rhubarb, tomatoes, peppers, and some beets, I think she sold close to $1,000 worth of garden produce.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So let's back up to the source. This rhubarb was in the pasture. Do you suppose years before that it was a homestead?
Yes, there was a farm. When I grew up, my mom, for some reason, I don't know if it was the soil in our garden, she had struggled to get rhubarb to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so we used to go driving around on a Sunday afternoon as a family. That was a lot of times that during the summer you would go out, we'd go to the pasture and check cattle. Yeah. And then you'd go riding around and see what all the neighbors' crops looked like, and who was putting up hay and this and that. Well, there were several vacant farmsteads north of our place, and my dad knew the people that had moved off of those farms and knew who was farming the land. And those places, there were a couple of those farms that had huge rhubarb patches. So we would pick rhubarb there. Mm-hmm. And this particular vacant farmstead where we got these roots was between Eureka and Leola on Highway 10. And as a small kid growing up, I remember, we would go to Aberdeen for dental and medical, and there were things that you just had to go to Aberdeen to get. And my mom, sometimes we would stop there and crawl across the barbed wire fence and pick a couple of paper grocery bags full of rhubarb. Mm-hmm. And Mom and Dad had talked to the people that owned it, and they didn't care. There was an old foundation there, and you could tell there had been buildings. Mm-hmm. Well, as we were driving, I was telling Tanya about this, that we used to pick rhubarb. And as we go by, I said, I think it's still there. And so we picked it. So this is you know, they talk about rhubarb, heritage rhubarb. I'm guessing these roots probably came from Odessa in the Ukraine with the pioneers and were planted there because it is the hardiest stuff. We've purchased ones at greenhouse and planted them. They're nothing compared to this stuff.
Mm-hmm. You know, there are several state universities that have apple heritage programs, and these men or women go out and they're detectives, and they go to old orchards and then take samples. They take them back to the lab and then see if this is a heritage, like one that's an apple or not. I wonder if there would be a heritage rhubarb.
I don't know, but I'm guessing this probably would be.
Yeah.
You know.
Jeff, way back, and you talk about the topic of marketing. Your dad marketed a certain way. How do you market your hogs today?
Well, the world has changed. The industry has changed a lot. I mean, back when when we had breeding stock, you primarily we put an ad in what was called the Green Sheet or the Farm Forum that came out of the Aberdeen paper every Friday. And back in the 70s, there used to be a whole page of classified ads advertising boars. That was primarily what you did. And then word of mouth from one farmer to the other. Oh, you know, he bought a boar from us and did really well. He was happy. And so his neighbor would call and, you know, we went to the state fair and we went to a couple of national shows, but that was the extent of it. Nowadays, you know, the internet has changed and revolutionized marketing. We do a lot of social media on Facebook. Then we also advertise in the national magazines. We used to run an ad for our annual pig sale, a quite large ad in the Farm Forum, but we found that it wasn't very effective for what we were trying to accomplish. We have quite an extensive, we have about a 750 person mailing list that we've developed. And so we will here shortly, I will put together, after our February farrowing, we will put together a letter and they will get mailed details about our sale. And we go to national shows. I mean, we've marketed breeding stock at national shows. But it's a whole different world with the internet and using social media.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you and Tanya do all this work yourself, or do you bring in extra help?
No, we do it all ourselves. We're not large enough to justify having hired help. Oh, we'll occasionally have a neighbor boy, you know, do something for us, just, you know, a few hours if we needed a task done that we needed help on. But you know, and we do have an excellent a coworker. Tanya is a crop adjuster with RCIS Crop Insurance, and one of her coworkers used to manage a 1,200 sow farrowing operation. And so consequently, when we go to a national show or like 2 weeks ago, we were at the South Dakota Pork Producers Pork Congress for 2 days as I'm on the board. They will do chores, and we never have to worry if there's a sick animal. She knows how to treat it, where the vaccine is. It's just, you know, I probably drove her crazy this last time because we left on Tuesday and we loaded sows in farrowing crates on Monday because they were due the Sunday when we came home, and I didn't want to have it that tight.
Yeah.
And have a train wreck. But I think I texted her 2 or 3 times a day and asked her, you know, in the morning and then in the evening, you know, everything okay? And finally one night, the last night, she called me and she says, "Don't worry, everything is fine."
Okay.
Yes. It's that confidence that you have as the owner and the breeder and the livestock man, that you just want to be sure that that new offspring is going to be well taken care of along with their mamas.
Exactly. You know, and but yeah, it's hard to get away. We're fortunate that we have these people that'll do the chores. But then when we're away, you're wondering, is everything okay? And Tanya keeps telling me, no news is good news. If they don't call,
Yes.
there's nothing wrong. Just
Yes.
That's
relax.
right.
Yes.
But you're just being a good parent, I guess. So you have a passion, obviously, for raising and showing livestock. So tell us how that started, and then how has this passion continued on to your children?
Well, it started out, I joined 4-H, of course, loved the livestock, and showed, and I didn't stay in 4-H. We had a very weak 4-H program when I was growing up. I think I was in 4-H maybe 4 years. But then by the time I was getting out, decided not to participate in 4-H, we had the purebred hogs, and we showed an open class. And I don't know, once that's it, I guess, and Janine can probably tell you that Fred would probably say the same thing. Once livestock is in your blood, it stays there, and you just don't get rid of it.
That's right.
You'll find that with Janine too, though.
Yeah.
So, but I had a passion for it. Once my kids, my son's the oldest, and once he was old enough, I had farmed for a number of years and farmed. My dad went through the farm crisis of the 80s, and then I tried to pick up the pieces at the end of the 80s and into the early 90s, and that's when my son was born. I got to a point where I could not find any further land to rent, so I couldn't expand my operation. And I had spent some time managing feed and fertilizer department for a local co-op and farming on the side. And I got a call to consider coming to Browns Valley, Minnesota to manage a fertilizer plant. The gentleman that was the general manager of that co-op knew me. And at that time I said, well, I wasn't really interested. And they kept making the offer better and better. And finally in the fall of 94, because I started farming in 88, which was 100% drought. We didn't need any harvest equipment. By the time 1994 rolled around, we were so extremely wet that we struggled to harvest the small grain crop. It was just a mess, mud, and that's when I got this phone call. And finally, after about 3 times when he called me, I said, well, I'll come and take a look. And consequently, I decided that maybe farming wasn't meant for me at the time, as much as I loved it. But when you couldn't get any more land to farm, you couldn't borrow any more money to buy newer or better machinery. And the livestock was, at that time, I mean, I remember selling calves for, you got $340 a calf coming off the cow in the fall. You thought you did pretty good. Today, if they aren't bringing right at 2,000, but all the costs have, of course, increased too. But I had the opportunity to go back into the ag business world. And at the time, my son was old enough for 4-H. And so we lived in town, but I knew a gentleman on the edge of town that had a barn. And so we started out with 3 4-H lambs. And I knew nothing about sheep, absolutely nothing. Other than that, when my sister was about, 5 or 6 years old, Dad bought a few ewes at the sale barn because she thought lambs were cute. And all I remember is if they got out in the spring, the first thing they did was go to the alfalfa field and bloat and die.
Yeah.
And so we had quite a learning experience. And in his second year, we made a trip to the Knopp farm in Iowa and bought a lamb. Mm-hmm. And my son had tremendously good experience with that lamb, did a lot of winning, and the kids were kind of hooked on it. My daughter is younger, but she wasn't old enough for 4-H and was crying, wanted to be, because she helped walk lambs. And they loved the 4-H livestock projects. They did static exhibits for a number of years, and then as they got older, those kind of lost their interest in that and just focused on livestock. And in the last few years that my son was showing, and they showed beef cattle, hogs, meat goats, and market lambs. And so they spent their summers in the barn.
Yes.
from early morning until late at night. Had a lot of success. My son went to college at SDSU, judged on the livestock judging team. Decided that he has a degree in animal science, and he ended up with a job as an agronomist. Kind of followed my footsteps because I worked in the co-op system as an agronomist and then for a seed company. And that's what he currently does. My daughter, the livestock passion really came through. She had an eye for judging and won our state 4-H livestock judging contest by a fair wide margin when she was junior in high school. And our county team won the state contest as a team, so they got to go to Louisville, and I helped coach and made the trip to Louisville. And after Louisville, she did very well at Louisville. She made the top 10 in swine, and she just missed the top 10 overall. And so she started getting recruitment calls from colleges, and consequently decided that for a girl that did not want to go to a livestock judging school when she was about 10 or 11 in 4-H, decided to take the judging scholarship at Butler Community College in Kansas, judged there for 2 years in the junior college program, and then transferred to Oklahoma State and judged there. And she met a young man in college, and they got married, and they live in Virginia. And she's coached the Virginia State 4-H livestock judging team. They did extremely well a couple of years ago in Kansas City. I think they were reserve champions at Kansas City, but she's been very involved out in Virginia. And now in December had my first grandson, and they're already prepping him for being involved in the livestock world.
That's kind of how it goes, isn't it? Jeff, this has been a marvelous fun chat, taking us through your life and beginning in 1959 through blizzards, through drip irrigation system, to the love and stewarding of hogs, and now going into the next 2 generations of succeeding you. What would your great grandparents say about coming from Russia and living this lifestyle? It's phenomenal. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, and it kind of gave me a time to sit down and reflect on what my upbringing was, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I mean, growing up with conservative German Russian heritage parents who worked hard and expected us to work hard, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yep. Those forks and scoop shovels are pretty impactful in life.
Yeah. And with my kids, I mean, growing up with them so heavily involved in 4-H, it was all the family time. It was the time in the pickup going down the road down to Fred and Janine's to look at lambs, or going to Indiana or going to Illinois. We put lots of miles on a vehicle, and there's a lot of stories that the kids reiterate and share about those trips. Some will never be forgotten. The ones where something went wrong or something was almost wrong, and it's just that family time and that family bonding time. There's nothing like it.
You bet.
All right.
Thank you. Life.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Jackie, can you close out?
It was very fun to hear all of your adventures, and thank you, viewers, for joining us. So until next time, tell your friends, even your relatives, about this 1950s fun chat. Toodaloo.
Bye-bye.
Bye.